Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you so much, Folk Music Ontario, for having me on to interview our guest today. My name is Racquel Villagante, and I'm the SOCAN A&R in sunny Los Angeles. And we are so very fortunate to get to speak with such an incredible and powerful and gifted songwriter today, Allison Russell.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you all.
Thank you so much for being on here. And yeah, just a reminder, if any of you have questions for Allison, you can pop your questions into the chat, and later on in our masterclass, we can ask those questions of Allison. So just to know, as some participants are still trickling in, just a little backstory for those of you just getting acquainted with our guest today. So on her debut album, Outside Child, Russell, now based in Nashville, reclaimed her story of being an abused child who found her lifeline in her hometown of Montreal. Russell moved to Vancouver when she came of age, where she had her first experiences as a professional musician, co-founding the band Po Girl. With her daughter's father, JT Nero, she founded the folk gospel Americana duo Birds of Chicago in 2012. In 2021, at the age of 42, she finally released her first solo album after overcoming the writer's block that emerged after the birth of her daughter. I felt an urgency to write, she says. It became important to me to express vocally what I've been through, to end the cycles of violence, racism, sexism, sexual violence. It's also very important to me to write my own story and be able to tell people that it's survivable. Russell's unique life story and songwriting experience promise to provide a fascinating and instructive look at the process of turning a song and overcoming the struggles of that activity. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Allison, your life story is just really truly about overcoming and survival. And I've listened to, the TED Talk video and the NPR and all of the things, just so beautifully, unveiled in song and in word. You are such a true artist and such a gifted songwriter. So we're really, really lucky to have you kind of reveal what your secrets are, what your tips are for all of these emerging songwriters. That are joining us today from all across Canada, I believe. So you've had decades of experience in the music industry all across the country and now in Nashville, which is amazing. So many accomplishments under your belt. Could you give us a little context in your own words of how you found yourself to be and identify as a songwriter?
Yeah, I think that it was accidental how I process trauma. Honestly, I think my songwriting is rooted in my early childhood experience of trauma, and that was an escape for me.
Mm-hmm.
And poetry, words. It started, I think, for me, kind of both poetry, literature, and music. They were all so intertwined, and I was surrounded by it growing up. I was really lucky to be in Montreal because Montreal is a city that is so steeped in art. It's just everywhere. We have the jazz festival every summer where there was incredible free music. We would have whole streets turn into pedestrian only streets, just filled with music and art. And that was such a huge part of my formative sensibility of anything. And as well, I think art just, it's not only an escape, but it helps us emotionally move through trauma, and that's just naturally what I did. And it was also a lot of circumstances and your child, you make up stories, or I did. And I lived inside of stories and I lived inside of books, and I would make up songs to poems that I read in books, and I would hide under the piano listening to my mother is a beautiful piano player, and listen to her play. And when I was in foster care for about 4 years when I was very small, and my foster parents were quite religious. They were French Canadian Catholic, and we would go to mass, and I loved the choir. That's what I just always gravitated towards, music. And I would hum melodies that I heard and make up other melodies based on what I heard. And it's just what I always did. I didn't know that I was writing songs per se
Mhm.
at that time, it was growing into that later. It was really, I think the first time I understood that someone who looked like me could be a songwriter was
Mhm.
um, because I after foster care, when I was about just before my fifth birthday, I went back to live with my biological mother and the man she had married, who unfortunately was very abusive, white supremacist, American expat, who had grown up in a sundown town in Indiana, who, of course, was a product of intergenerational abuse and trauma himself. And,
Right.
I personally believe that indoctrinating children in horrifically violent false ideologies of white supremacy is in itself a form of child abuse.
Mhm.
So he underwent that, and he also underwent physical abuse. And, anyway, he brought all of his kind of unhealed trauma with him, and he became my primary abuser for a decade.
Wow. Wow.
And one of his tyrannies was music. We were not allowed to listen to any music that was sort of basically after the Baroque period. He would, few
Wow.
romantic composers allowed in the mix. Anything written after the Baroque period was, we would get physically reprimanded for listening to.
Wow.
And so I just did not know that someone and he was so intensely entrenched in the false ideology of white supremacy that, I just didn't know that anyone that looked like me could write.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it was when I was 9 years old. I went on my first airplane ride from Montreal to Edmonton. My uncle was an actor out there at the time, and he was going to be getting married, and I went for his wedding. And we did a drive through the Rocky Mountains. It was my first time seeing the Rocky Mountains, and he played me Tracy Chapman's Tracy Chapman on the car tape deck, because
Wow.
that was when it was
Yeah.
tape deck still
I
in
remember
cars.
those days.
Yes, I
Yeah.
was 9 years old, so this was 1989, and it was just, um, it was revelatory. It was life changing.
Yeah.
I'll never forget hearing specifically. I remember hearing the song, Tracy Chapman's song "Behind the Wall," and it
Mhm.
was it was transformative on a number of levels. It was she wrote this. She looks, she's a beautiful black woman, and she writes, and people are
Mhm.
listening to it, and people made recordings of it, and it's being, internationally acclaimed as the brilliant work that it was and continues to be.
Yeah.
That was revelatory, just that, for my
Wow.
poor little crushed colonized mind.
Yeah.
And then it was also, she was singing about an experience similar to mine. Like, we were the family behind the wall. So
Mhm.
suddenly it was this, I'm not alone, there's other people. It was really the opening, it was this door opening. It
Right.
was the door to freedom opening, and my little feet starting to walk down that path.
Wow. 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 Must have been so powerful to also have that sort of realization that you're not alone, that there's representation, there's sort of a window out or door that opened, and then you're also traveling to the other side of the country and experiencing a new environment, seeing family who are in the arts and are doing that for a living. So that type of representation, even within your family, is, I think, really powerful. And it gives you a glimpse into what's possible,
Yes,
and that there is a wider world out there. Is that sort of, that's what I kind of gathered, at least from some of your music, this idea of there's possibility of overcoming. It's not done. This is not the best it's going to be. It's going to get better. Um,
exactly.
that kind of theme or that message is what I get out of your music, and it's especially on this album, this solo album that you've released, Outside Child. You really do give hope, I think, is the message as well to anyone who's in the depths of despair, in the trauma, and going through it. There's, light at the end of the tunnel, and that's the message that I got from that. Do you get in that headspace of like who the audience could potentially be that you're writing to when you're writing this music? Like, maybe you can take us into the process of writing this music that is very personal and autobiographical, and like what's sort of like the mindset or the perspective that you have as you're crafting these songs?
So for my own personal work, I don't think that I'm ever thinking about an audience as I'm writing. That's just that's for later. That's for if you decide to release, for me anyway, if I decide to share the work. Because of course we write all the time. We're not necessarily going to share
Mhm.
everything that we write. We may think it's not worthy of sharing. We may think it's too personal to share. We may just decide it's not the right time to, songs have long lives, and you don't always immediately share something that you wrote, or maybe ever, But for me, I write because I'm compelled to
Mhm.
write, and I write because it makes me feel more human, and I write because it helps me stay grounded in the kind of person and mother and partner that I want to be. It helps me move still. It helps me move through, and not just trauma, but just process life. That's
Mhm.
what I journal, I write poetry, I'm writing a book. I just write. That's what I do. And it makes me feel more whole as a human being to write.
Yes.
And, not everything. I think when I was first starting, I would self edit very heavily before I got words out onto the page, or onto the computer or onto the notes on your phone or however you do it. It was something that I struggled with, where you're judging yourself as you are in the process of
Yeah.
creation, and that is one thing I would say. I think everybody's process is different, but that is one. The sooner we can for leave that behind, the
Mhm.
kind of intense internal self-critic, before we
Yes.
have a chance to write, because no, it's okay, you can go anywhere. You can write, as Michaela Cole said, write the things that terrify you, write the things
Yeah.
that uplift you. You can write anything. You don't have to choose to share it, but you
Mhm.
don't know, you may want to share it at some point, but let yourself get the idea out, get the words out, get the melody out, let yourself do that. And then you can edit later.
Mhm.
And I just think, that is something, everybody has a different process. And for me, it's different song to song. This particular album cycle for Outside Child these songs were written in the space of 3 months between, I was on the road with Our Native Daughters, which is a group I'm part of, with Rhiannon Giddens, Layla McCalla, and Amethyst Kia, who are all extraordinary musicians and humans. We made a record together called Songs of Our Native Daughters, and we were on the road in 2019. We took out 2 buses. We had all our kids. So between us, Rihanna has
Wow.
2, Layla has 3, I have 1 child. So we had 6 kids on the road. And
Oh
poor Amethyst, who has no kids, had to put up with all of it.
my.
And we had a film crew from the Smithsonian, because they were coming just to film this process of
Yeah.
us. They had been there with us from the, in the studio through to the tour. We had my daughter's first early childhood educator came out on the road as the tour nanny. And
That's
it was
amazing.
just
Well, you
Layla
need
and
that. You
I.
need that because
We
you're
did. I mean,
yeah,
Layla
you're
and all the
busy
kids.
and you can't be doing all the childcare.
We had
That's so
shows every
blessed.
night. We had interviews every day. We were doing radio. We were doing press. We were doing, all of it. So the kids it was incredible.
Wow.
Where
You could write a book about those kids. You could write like
that's a whole
how
story.
to go on
Well,
tour with 6 children.
I've done it all different ways. That was actually like, we had buses. That was very glamorous for me. I'm not, I've been a working class musician all of my life. It has not been glamorous touring. It has been like in the van and raising
Yeah,
our daughter on the road. I
it's
toured
gritty. It's
the whole
gritty and raw and
It was gritty. Yeah, it was not glamorous. It was like side nursing on a crazy winding road with her in the little car seat and the band jammed into, an Econoline Ford van. So it was
Oh,
not, yeah, it was not glamorous, a lot of our touring. So the bus was like, oh, we have a little
wow.
kitchen area. We have,
That's so real.
oh,
It's so
yeah,
real. Yeah.
yeah. So it
To
was,
to do it all in this industry, especially
yeah,
as a woman, it's,
yeah,
yeah, there's so many facets to it.
there
Um,
are.
and as far as like writing when you're on the road, did you find that it was like more inspiring when you're on the move to write? I find when I speak to artists and they're on tour or when they're in a new environment, that's when they like get that spark of
Yeah.
inspiration. Was that kind of how it was for you? You were like on the go and
It
ideas
was
flowing?
what it was a bit different than that in this case. It was that the work that we had begun on Our Native Daughters was really delving into the experience of the Black diaspora through women's voices. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of that has been purposefully erased. And we were finding ourselves in sort of the spaces between and the things that weren't said. For example, Amethyst and I wrote a song called Pollyanne's Hammer that was directly inspired by the kind of iconic John Henry story. And it was so clear that she was always there. There's in every version of the song, there's always a line about when John was sick, Polly picks up the hammer, his partner, and does the work. He dies at the end of this song. And I'm like, well, here, how do we even know his story? Well, she kept it alive. She survived the work that killed him. She raised the
Mm-hmm.
kids. She kept the family together. She did the same work he did and didn't die. Like
Wow.
there's a woman at the heart of this story
Yes.
whose story is unsung. So we wrote
Yes.
her song. We wrote it
Wow.
taking from that kind of
Telling the
folklore.
story, yeah, telling the story of the narrative
Yeah,
from the person that didn't get to tell it,
yeah. And
or
who's so clearly always in the
but
story.
is the,
Yeah,
yeah, is the
yeah,
hero, is the hero.
yeah. She's the hero. And so that was like we were really deeply excavating some painful history. And I was also at that time connecting even more deeply with my biological paternal family, whom I met, my Black family,
Right.
my Grenadian family, and we,
Anita, yeah.
we did not meet until I was 30 years old. So
Wow.
that's been a whole journey in and of itself. And
Wow.
right when we were going into the studio with Our Native Daughters for that Songs of Our Native Daughters record, I was learning more about my own lineage. And I
Mhm.
learned the name of the great great matriarch as far back as we can go of our paternal lineage, a woman named Kashiba, who was born free and kidnapped and enslaved and survived the Middle Passage and survived, multiple enslavers and traumas and horrors I don't even want to imagine. But it was her ability somehow to keep hope alive, to survive all of that. That's the reason I'm in the world. That's the reason my daughter's in the world. And it was the first time that I connected my own history and the trauma that I lived through and survived as a child to much larger picture of
Mhm.
of you know
This lineage of survivors, of
exactly,
ancestors,
exactly,
who are weaving themselves into the future, the present, and the
yeah,
future.
ex-
Um,
exactly.
mentioned in your bio and in interviews about how you had this writer's block and you were kind of questioning like, is the writing is do I have songs coming, like where
Yeah,
am
am I
I
ever going to be a
am
writer
I
again? I
gonna
really did.
write
I
again?
thought,
Yeah.
yeah, it was when I became a mom, and it was 3 years of not being able to finish a song, other than lullabies that I sang to my daughter, and it was terrifying, and it was, my whole. It was also like who are we? I've identified as a songwriter for so
Yeah.
long. When that was gone, it was like, who am I even?
Yeah.
What do I do? I have no plan B. I
Right.
don't know what else to do.
So
And
you've almost like lost a sense of your identity when you became a mother, but then obviously it transformed you as a songwriter, and you've evolved in your craft of songwriting because you have that experience of being a mother. How has sort of your songwriting evolved over time? Like looking back, like have you kind of noticed there's been changes with like themes and like how the lyrics flow?
I
Like,
mean,
how
that's
is
an
that kind of,
interesting
yeah.
question. I feel like it's such gradually by degrees. It's hard for me to have perspective,
Mm-hmm.
on the sort of metrics of how it's changed or not. I think everything has become more urgent for me. I think I
Mm,
fell silent when my daughter was born because I understood that I was now becoming part of this stream of ancestors. And we're at a critical, pivotal time in our species existence, in my opinion, and in a
mm-hmm.
lot of scientists and ecologists and
100%. Yep.
historians' opinions.
Yep.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
we are at a precipice. We have kind of driven ourselves onto this precipice, and we're taking down other species with us. And can we come out of the tailspin? And
Yes. Yeah.
I just think about that's part of it. There's this that
Mhm.
we do not spring out of a vacuum, and we're not
Yeah.
in dominion over anything. We
Connected. Yeah.
we are interconnected, deeply interconnected. All of us are human family, obviously, but also with our Earth Mother.
Mm-hmm.
We are deeply dependent, interdependent, interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have these extractive, exploitative, hierarchical models that have just sort of infected our human family globally, that is just
Yeah.
the story. I don't know that we've ever really moved past a feudal model of looking at the world of like there's someone supposedly more worthy up here and
Status
a
and
bunch of less
hierarchy
worthy
and
people
yep.
down here. It's
Yep.
just, and it's so clearly a fallacy, and it's one
Mm-hmm.
that's killing us.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that was part of it. When I became a mom, I was overwhelmed by the world I've brought my child into, by my role in it, by what can I do with my limited sphere of influence and knowledge or expertise, or what I can do. All I really have to throw at any problem are words.
Mm,
And
wow.
so I just got overwhelmed, I think, because I thought, well, every word counts. It really
Yes.
counts. It really matters. I think one of the least true things that has ever been said, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can
Mm-hmm.
never hurt me. No, words kill, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they can heal too. And so
Mm-hmm. The
that's
power
what
of
the
words.
power of, I was
Yes.
overwhelmed by it in a way,
Yes.
overwhelmed by motherhood in a way, but also transformed. You're right. And
Mm,
what ended up coming out of that experience with our native daughters kicked the floodgates back open. And I now have a different view of writer's block. In some ways, I don't think of it anymore as a block. I think of it as a
mm,
fallow period. Like just like in agriculture, a
right.
field needs to lay fallow sometimes in order to
Right.
regenerate. And I think that's what happened to me. I needed to
Mm,
have a time of living, experiencing.
yes. Yeah.
I was still continuing to make music. My partner JT Nero is a beautiful writer, and so I had the luxury at that time. We were in Birds of Chicago together. He just, he had the parenthood had the opposite effect for him. He just couldn't became extra prolific. He always had more, and it just continued. So I was lucky in that one of my favorite songwriters was writing plenty of songs for me to sing at that time. So I wasn't in the
That
position
helps.
of like, how am I going to put food on the table? I can't write a song.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and so I had that grace period of
There's ebbs
just
and flows.
growing and
Yeah, it's
transforming
seasons.
and
Mhm.
yeah, growing into my motherhood and growing, understanding that I'm part of the stream of ancestors, that in fact we all are, whether we have our own children or not, or whether we ever choose to. We are we are shaping the world that our human
Mm,
kindred are going to inherit, and not just our human kindred.
mhm.
We are shaping it and we are changing it, and we have a choice right now,
Yeah.
either to continue in really destructive, extractive, exploitative practices, or to make a real shift.
hmm
And
And I know that you also mentioned how not just words have this power, but songs, I think you said songs save your life. And just even thinking about you driving in the car, listening to Tracy and listening to that song and how that was transformative, I'm sure that your music has also done the same for others. Um,
I can only hope.
and, like given them hope and I think what's so beautiful is that you can take your life experience, put it into words and into a song, and that can go forth into the world kind of like a child, you know, that you give birth to, and it
Yeah.
can transform someone else's life and give them what you were given, you know, in that moment that you needed it. So it's kind of like this like gift that keeps giving sort of thing. And it's like a type of thing
Yeah.
with having a your daughter. Was there's this sense of like responsibility in that, like the words and the message, you wanted that to be like a gift to your daughter, or was it sort of like um I mean, because you mentioned like a sense of urgency with this album, and I definitely felt like it covered so much ground and you told so many stories, and it was kind of like it just basically encapsulated so much in one album, which I think that's what makes it such a masterpiece, is that it's it's really on the head on like topics, but it's also very artistic, and you can kind of like listen to it without even realizing like, oh, this is what's being said, like it's, you know what I mean, like the when I saw the lyric video for I think it was fourth it was Fourth Day Prayer, and I read the lyrics. I was like, wait, this is your story actually. And I think that that's just so powerful to be able to say something like so frankly in a way, because I think with a lot of music there can be this like symbolism, or like this like it's like not cool to be like too on the nose with stories and that kind of thing, but you just kind of hit it right on the head. um, as far as like finding the right words to say, like how what's your practice in that? Do you have like journals that you like go through to find those words? um, because I think, I mean, a lot of the artists that we work with, they maybe are really good at performing and they're really strong musicians, but when it comes to the lyrics and the words, that can be the struggle, and they need to kind of bring a top liner in to help them with the words.
Mhm.
um, yeah, how has that journey been with like finding the words and knowing when the words are right and the words are actually emoting or saying what you want, what you intend to say?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is a simple answer to it. I think that it's a constant process. And these particular songs were exceptions in that it really was, it was like this period of 3 months of intensive writing. And 9 of them I co wrote with my life partner. And that's the most kind of intimate, terrifying thing we've ever done other than make a baby. And
Right, right.
like, like another kind of a baby.
Making
And it
song
was,
babies. Wow.
yeah. And it was
So,
very, very much like I was afraid to
mhm,
step into my own story in my
mhm,
own name and my own words.
mhm. That would be terrifying, and I don't think that
I was
it
afraid
would
to
be
do it.
comfortable to do.
It
But you had a partner who you trusted, who you could be vulnerable with,
Yeah.
who understood where you were coming from and was empathic, of course. So, yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the songwriting process with a partner, with a collaborator, because we do a lot of we do our Songcat Mondays every Monday, and it can be sort of uncomfortable for some songwriters to get in a session with someone and have to work through that process with someone. It takes vulnerability, but do you have any suggestions or tips with how you've been able to sort of bring your most authentic, um, articulate self in these sessions?
Well, here's the thing for me with there's so many different ways. I know sometimes it's like the speed dating of songwriting,
Mm-hmm.
co-writing.
Mm-hmm.
That
So, yeah,
has its
it's like
challenges where
matchmaking.
it's
Like, yeah, you're like
literally
on a blind date with
over.
someone and you
Yeah.
don't know
And
what
that
you're
can be
getting,
that
but
can
you got to
be
make a song by the end of the day. Yeah,
Yeah, and it
yeah.
can be tough, and it depends, so much is like, what are you writing for? When I work with, say, I'm just working with another artist who, what you were talking about, they want someone to come in and just help them kind of focus their vision. Maybe lyrics are tougher for them, or whatever it is. I love doing that kind of work, and it's very different than the personal work that I do, if that makes sense, right? Like when
Hmm.
when I'm in
100%.
service of another artist's vision, it's simplifying in some ways, right? It takes, first of all, it takes the any kind of sort of like ego insecurity out of it because it's not about me, right? It's about this other artist. And
Right. Yeah.
I get to, try to open my heart to who this person is and try to help them, you know, sort of clothe their vision. And I love that work, but it's very, very different than the personal work. And I will say for this record with my partner, what we went through to get to this point was a whole lifetime of experiences together.
Mm.
It was it was 3 years of long distance dating while I was on the road full time with Po Girl, and he still had a day job in the trenches of the, food, fine dining industry in writing songs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was 7 years of us being together on the road continually. It was having a child and raising her on the road, and it was 50 now at this point. This year we're together 15 years, and it took us
Uh,
until 2019, which is when I wrote and we co-wrote a lot of Outside Child together. All of it was written in that 3 month period. It took all of those years and all of those
right.
experiences and all of that built
It
up
was a
trust and
culmination
all of
of
that
15
into each
years.
other.
Wow.
And then it took us being apart for the first time because it wasn't until I was on the road with our native daughters that
Mm.
these songs started coming through. And I was with my daughter, and my daughter was afraid on the bus to sleep because it sounded like a monster to her. So she was
Oh,
into
no.
these little bus bunks. She was crunched into the bunk with me. And, it was, she had an accident one night, and it was this comical situation where, we're driving overnight and our clothes were in the hole.
Oh
The bus driver was not a huge fan of people, let alone women or children. He
no. Oh
wouldn't stop for me to get a change.
dear.
So I put her, in this ridiculous one of our merch shirts. I think it was a Black Myself merch shirt because Amethyst wrote this amazing song, Black Myself, and I put
Love
that
it.
shirt
Yes.
on Ida, and I had a bathing suit stuffed in my purse from like a swim stop that we'd done the day before. So I was wearing this ridiculous bikini and trying to clean the urine off the bunk and like get my baby back to bed. And I
Wow.
was laughing about like, this is the hardest thing happening in my life right now. And I've come through all of these things, and there was
Yeah.
such a joyfulness about that. There was this survivor's joy that I experienced in such a real way in that moment.
Wow.
Crystallized in my mind that I need to write about this because the people that tell teenagers these are the best years of your life don't
Hmm.
understand how horrific that is to say to someone at that point in their life because it's nobody's best years of their life.
It's
Like
actually, no, it's like honestly the toughest. And I think it's
the
like,
toughest. Yes.
and I mean, yeah, I mean, especially in the world today, like what we're going through with the pandemic and all of this, like I think it's tougher even with like social media and,
Oh,
seeing what people are doing and what people look like and this whole
we're having a
comparison
crisis.
thing and
We're having a crisis among
yeah, it's
among our youth right
depression,
now.
anxiety,
Depression, anxiety,
suicide.
suicide rates
Yeah.
climbing. We that is why I felt suddenly it was that feeling of this survivor's joy. It was understanding that because I can tell my story, I have to.
Yeah.
And I want to be very careful about this.
Mhm.
Survivors, some folks will never speak of it, and
Mhm.
that is just fine. Like it's different for
Mhm.
everybody. I felt compelled to speak about it and to write about it and to sing about it. And that is what I do. I tell stories through song.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when I realized that I could, then it became this, it felt like a mission, like a mandate, like
Mm.
I have to write about this because I can and not everybody can.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
you're right in that my hope is that it could be of some use to another person living through some of the things that I lived through because unfortunately I know I wish I was alone in that experience in that story. I wish nothing more than to be alone in that experience, but unfortunately I'm one in three women. It's
Yeah.
one in two. non-binary or trans or intersex folks. It's 1 in 4 men. It's a pandemic of epic proportions. And
Hmm.
right now it's coinciding with the COVID pandemic, which is
Yeah.
exacerbating and worsening all of these pre-existing,
Yeah.
you know, the pandemic of
Yes.
abuse, violence.
Yes.
It's exacerbating them, right?
It's all
And so
colliding all at all at the same time. It's all converging.
exactly, and
Yeah.
I just felt like I need to move through this story and show it one child's roadmap out, right? That this was my
Mm.
way.
Wow.
It be different for different people, but there it does get better. In
Yeah.
fact, it does. And
Yeah.
there are people who will see you and value you and love you just as you are. And
Mm.
you will find chosen family and you will find community if you can hold on. I wouldn't have believed it when I was 15 and sleeping in a graveyard. What was these incredible experiences that I've been able to have,
Right.
to get to be a mother and to get to raise my daughter in a non-abusive environment and give her a father who would never hurt a hair on her head.
Wow.
It's like that has been so healing, and to be able to do that. And it shouldn't just be my child, it
Mhm.
should be every child. I think about what's happening in our country right now,
Mhm.
the trauma that we're literally, the
Mhm.
spirits and the bones of little ones who were horrifically abused and murdered
Mhm.
in our country, and is coming to light now. And it's like we have to, like, yes, it's hard and it's awful and people feel guilt and we need to. We
Mhm.
need to feel it all. Or
Mhm.
we will perpetuate these cycles. We're still perpetuating violence
Yeah.
on children and women in our country, in
Mhm.
this country, and globally. And
Yeah.
that has to stop. And it
Mhm.
doesn't stop if we don't talk about it. And it doesn't stop.
Exactly.
And it doesn't stop if people don't feel that pain as their own.
Right.
There has been, because of bigotry,
Mhm.
because of widespread white supremacist indoctrination and violence and the insidiousness of that kind of ideology. It's just everywhere. The tokenization of Black, Indigenous people is tokenization means
Mhm.
dehumanization. That's what it means,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like that's why I feel urgent about sharing art, because art
Mhm.
builds empathy. Art helps us to feel another's crisis or
Yes.
joy or
Yes.
loves or pains or sorrows as our own. We've all of us who are not uh, cisgender white straight men have
Mhm.
like PhDs in empathy, because in order to survive, we have had to be able to see the world through a white cisgender straight man's eyes in order for us to survive,
100%.
right?
Yes.
So
It's the
we have
adaptive
a gift for empathy.
instincts. Yeah.
We've
Mhm.
had to build it. We've had to,
Yeah.
and people that have always been centered their whole lives and had the world revolve around them their whole
Yeah.
lives, they have an empathy deficit.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily their fault, but this is
Mhm.
like how do we I'm interested in harm reduction is what it comes down to. I'm
Mhm.
interested in harm reduction as a human in the world, and I think that is what I hope to do in some way with my art as well.
Wow.
I make art for myself, right? But I share it. I choose to share it in the hopes of connecting, in the hopes
Mhm.
of building empathy, in the hopes of reducing the harm of some of these pandemics, bigotry, abuse, violence that have been plaguing our
Yeah.
species and our world.
Wow.
And then that sounds grandiose. I don't mean it in a grandiose way. I just mean, like, we all have a sphere of influence and we all have
Mhm. Yeah.
a unique lived experience, perspective, story, and our stories have value. And for
Yes.
many,
Yeah.
many, many, many thousands of years, basically, we've been told that some of our stories have less value than other stories, and our stories,
Right. Yeah.
and that is, in fact, our stories are the most important right now in order to restore balance. You know,
Wow.
not that
That's
they're more important than a
incredible.
white
Yeah.
cisgender whatever straight man story. I have nothing. I'm married to a white cisgender straight man. I love him, but it's like we need
Yeah.
our stories, the stories that have been repressed, suppressed,
Yes.
oppressed, devalued, erased. You
They
did.
need to be they need to be brought out of us, and they need to be brought to the forefront, and they need to be centered and spotlit and given the mic and given the loudest volume possible.
Yes.
It's time.
Yeah.
It's time, you know. And you mentioned the balancing act, because I mean, we consume so much media that's toxic and that's negative, and maybe we don't even realize, you know, the implications like on our psyches when we're listening to this stuff and consuming this stuff on the daily. But I think what I get from your songs and your music and your art is this um, positivity, but like realness. Like it's a realness, and it's just so powerful, and like I said, gives hope. And even listening to your album earlier today, it just like brought me to tears, because it did remind me of other people in my life that I've been, you know, trying to support and help through difficult times. So just what you were mentioning about, you know, connecting and seeing yourself in others, like that's what I got from your music. And I think so many of our audience members also agree that that's what they get when they listen to your music. And I think that's what true artists, or most artists, are going to want, is just connection, like knowing that when they put their thoughts and their ideas and their emotions out there in a song, that someone out there is going to connect and see themselves or hear themselves in that, and not feel alone, and feel understood and empathized with.
And
But
that's
yeah, it's just so powerful. Like what everything that you said, I think that needs to be like recorded, put in a video on YouTube, because you just hit on everything. And I don't think any stone was left unturned in our talk so far. Um, but I would love to open up the floor to some questions from the participants in the chat. I think there's like 16 in here. Just all comments. Or hold on one second. Okay, there's one question here from Chris. How do you overcome the fear of writing it down, even if not intended for anyone else to read or hear? Fear that someone will see it, discover it. It's a prominent part of my self-censorship. Any advice for overcoming it?
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, I think if
Oh,
you
or if not overcoming, how to embrace it, comfort it,
yeah,
and move
move
through
through
it.
it,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, Chris, I would ask, do you feel like, is it a fear of if you wrote it down, someone could still see it? Or I think that is the problem. We all have this feeling of a giant eye upon us. And of course, it's gotten worse because we literally carry around tracking devices, like all the time. So, yeah, I get that. And I could see fear of writing things digitally because of hacking. But what for me, I'm so analog still with the way that I process that I always start pen and paper. I always have it, I'll show you. I always have this kind of a thing on the
Yeah.
go. And that's always my first thing. And that's where I allow myself to be completely uncensored, and just how do I do it? Well, sometimes, frankly, I have to sit and cry in the bath and have a glass of rosé and write, and write things down. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm not pushing substance.
Bubble baths and bubbles in the
Right. I
bath.
mean, but also for me, movement. Movement is something that allows my subconscious to like commune more clearly with my conscious mind. And I'm really into running. That's something that has been like sort of a self therapy in my life, distance running. I'm incredibly slow, but I'll go for a long, and it helps me stop those voices, right? Those internal voices that natter
Mm,
at you and tell you
chatter. Yeah, yeah.
everything is unworthy even as you're trying to get it out. And of course, I mean, I think all the I can't speak obviously for all survivors, everybody's different, but all the survivors that have shared with me have a similar thing of just the kind of the self negation voice, the self-hating voice, that's very hard to shut up. And that's where I've gotten into movement stuff. Running really helps me move through that and let it fall away. Um,
Like it's almost like meditation,
meditation.
movement meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
There's another question here from Tara. Is the vulnerability of recording these songs different from the vulnerability of performing them live? I'm astounded by your courage on both fronts.
yeah, the recording them I think was harder because they were so new. So they were written between July 2019 when I started the Our Native Daughters tour, that culminated at the Newport Folk Fest that year, and end of September of 2019, at Americana Fest, because we recorded all of these songs in 4 days, at the Sound Emporium studio here in Nashville. It was right after Americana Fest, and I had gotten a grant from the Canada Council of the Arts. Thank you, Canada
Yay!
of the Arts. That's the only reason this record exists in the world, is because the Canada Council of the Arts gave me a grant. We were so broke in 2019. I mean, just so I couldn't afford a studio. There was no way. And I got this. I had applied for a few grants, and because my dear friend Kaya Cater's mom helped me navigate the grant system to Mary Cater. Everyone should know Kaya Cater too. She's incredible. She's a brilliant
Kaya Cater. Okay.
Canadian songwriter. She's wonderful. Also a Montreal Grenadian like me.
Nice.
And but she's
Represent. That's amazing. Okay.
she,
How do you spell it?
Kaya is Kaia, and then Cater is Kater. She's
Okay.
phenomenal.
Put that
Yeah,
in the
and
chat.
it was actually
I'll
her
look her
mom
up.
who helped me navigate.
The
Her mom was
grants.
an educator who helped me navigate the grant system.
We are very lucky in Canada to be able to tap into the grant system because it's
Yes.
not cheap being an artist. It costs a
No,
lot. It's a lot of investment, especially in recording and
it
having a
was
studio like the one in Nashville for 4 days. That must have,
I think about, well,
but
so that
yeah.
was where the grant, I mean, so it was a grant for, like, it was like a writing and exploration and demo grant. And
Oh,
so it was like when we went into the studio, I was still so much in denial about that I was even making a solo record, that I was telling myself that we're just making some demos and I don't know what I'll use it for. But it was just so clear. The process in the studio, I was very, very lucky to be surrounded by a sort of chosen family community who are all brilliant artists, many of whom I've worked with for your partner JT, like my dear sister Yola. Like, there's years of trust built up,
mm,
and it was really emotional. It was intense. We recorded 11 songs in 4 days.
wow.
We were laughing, we were crying. It was really, really cathartic. Our daughter came to the studio and hung out for part of it. Dan Nobler, who produced the record, his beautiful wife Carrie, and their little boy Willoughby came down. Like, we had people's kids. We had, this is
Wow. It was like a
pandemic,
family
so we were just
reunion.
puppy pile.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it was really
Wow.
joyful. And by the end of it, I understood, that this was a whole, its own work, and that there was no way I could put this out,
Mhm.
re-record these songs with Our Native Daughters, or re-record them with Birds of Chicago. Like, I had to
Mhm.
step forward. I had to be brave and do the thing that scared me the most, and I
Wow.
think it scared me so much. And I had to do that, because if I'm too scared to do that, what kind of sort of traumatic neurosis am I then putting on my own kid, if I'm too scared to sing in my own name and be my full self?
Mm.
What I don't want, I know that I can't protect my child from all trauma. Of course I know that, but I can try really hard to stop the cycle of
Mhm.
traumatic violence that my family has been trapped in for generations.
Mhm.
And I mean, that my diaspora has
Yeah.
been trapped in for generations, and that just felt terrifying. I mean, particularly because the things that I had to do to survive as a child, which was to self-efface, to hide, to acquiesce, to pretend to be someone I wasn't, to fulfill whatever sick fantasy of my abusers, like,
Mhm.
I that was survival, and that has become a liability, if I want to be part of stopping these cycles, if I want to be a good mother and a good ancestor.
Right.
I to
this is how you end that cycle, is step
yeah,
out in courage
yeah,
and go beyond the surviving. Now you're thriving because you're like,
exactly. Yeah, and
I came through this
feeling,
and now this is what it looks like to thrive.
yeah.
And giving that example to your daughter, that's just, wow, that's so powerful. And it must have been like a therapeutic
It
experience as
was,
well.
but it also felt I had the same thing when I gave birth to my daughter of like this feeling of, I don't know, like mitochondrial memory of this has been done so many millions of times by so many millions of powerful, powerful women. Like
Mhm.
that the fear went away at that point where it was like, of course I can do this, you know?
Right.
And we were incredibly lucky to have no complications, and I was able to have, the natural birth I dreamt of. And that doesn't always happen. It doesn't, however it happens is the perfect way for that mother and that baby, and or that birth giver and that baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, I had the same feeling of this connection to, it is part of our birthright as humans. Artistic expression is part of our birthright as humans. Resilience and strength is part of our birthright as humans. Like that story of intergenerational trauma that we are all part of in some way.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what your lineage is, where your nearest or furthest ancestors came from. I mean, if you go far enough back, we are literally all family. And
Mhm.
every single person, no matter what their culture, ethnicity, lineage, religion, orientation, identity, whatever it is, we all come from long lines of survivors. And that
Yes.
part of our human heritage, this resilience and strength, is the other side of the coin of the trauma. And
Right.
we try to hide the memories of the trauma, or erase it, or pretend everything was just fine. And
Mhm.
we also erase
Mhm.
the strength and the
Right.
stories and the resilience and the experiences that can inform us so that we don't have to repeat them, right?
Mhm.
And it's all of it. Like it's okay. We can live through hard things, we can survive them, and we can have joy and thriving on the other side of it. Exactly.
Yes. Yes. Incredible. Um, I think there might be a couple more questions in here before we wrap. I think maybe we have time for two more. Um, Frederick says, how do your compositions change when using different instruments to write? Do you use different instruments or mostly write on banjo?
That's a great question. I do a lot of my writing on banjo. I am not. I always feel like embarrassed, particularly with our native daughters, and people are like the banjo players. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
Rhiannon is a banjoist. I am a songwriter who plays the banjo. Like, I write songs on the banjo. Like you do not want to hire me to be a banjoist in your band. But I write songs on it. But I also, that is such a great question, because that is, and actually, Chris, to what you said earlier of getting, kind of getting around your block, that has been for me a huge, clarinet is just this heart opener for me. And I often, melodies will come through to me on the clarinet that I would never come up with on the banjo or the piano or the guitar, or just singing. Like melodies come through in this different way. And sometimes it's just starts with voice, like again, that back to the movement thing. I'm really obsessed with long distance walking and running, and melodies and words and songs come through to me that way all the time. So sometimes they'll just start, just words and melody, and then I'll flesh it out later. But the bones come from that. But definitely the banjo has been a real, um, an opener, some sort of conduit for me to access my own intuition and subconscious, and it makes me feel
Wow.
connected to kind of the whole history of the Black diaspora in this
Yeah.
beautiful
It's
healing
like
way.
it's like the instrument was the key to this
Yeah,
portal.
yeah.
Um, and then Chris says, awesome, I play the flute. We'll try that too. And I love your clarinet expressions. Yes,
Ah,
your voice is clarinet and long phrasing. Um,
oh,
I
hey,
think we have time for one more
my
question.
baby brother plays the flute, and we used to do
Oh,
clarinet and flute duets all the time.
amazing. I love that. Clarinet and flute fan. Um, Do you have advice for writing songs that will showcase a big, powerful voice? My partner has a big voice, but I don't. So I'm more used to writing mellow music.
That's a really interesting question. I would say that your partner as an interpreter will be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? Because the melody, I feel like, I mean, you could do, if it's a range thing, it's interesting because I know, like, I feel like we all have, we know what our vocal range is. And so we kind of write within that. It can be
Mm,
fun to, like, just play around if with the, even if you're just like, I don't know which instruments you like to write with, but you could play around just with higher register stuff if it's like kind of a range thing. But I feel like melodically, a bigger voiced singer can interpret, can take your melody or your words and interpret it in their way. And that's where the magic comes in, I feel like, because they'll go somewhere you wouldn't think to go. And
right.
it's so fun. And I think the more you do it, the more you write for them, the easier it will become to do it.
Love it. Yeah, it just takes a couple tries and then you'll find your groove. Um,
And it will evolve, it will grow.
yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned like trust building and having that with a partner. It's so key to, getting outside your comfort zone. And gratitude to you, Allison, for your tremendous musical work, courage, and your sharing here today. And thank you, Racquel, for hosting. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think we have one more minute. There's one question at the very end. Hopefully, we don't get cut off. Were the songs fully formed before you went into the studio? That's what Tanya Joy is asking. Were they fully done before you
Tanya,
went in?
hi, Tanya Joy, and thank you for putting me on your playlist. That was so kind of you.
Aww.
She's an amazing artist too.
Oh,
So no, in fact, Joy, can I say a swear word or are we not allowed?
oh yeah. It's not, I don't think it's censored.
Okay.
Don't
So
censor
Joyful,
yourself.
excuse me for the bad language. Joyful Motherfuckers was written, we finished writing it in the studio. That was the last song written for the record. And we were kind of, it just came together in the studio and we sang it. And it was like the first take that we used where everybody just,
Wow, it was a first take.
communion. It felt like communion. And that's what I will say. All of these songs were recorded essentially live. Like I
Yeah.
was in, kind of one room with open doors and we were in a circle, the band was in a circle around and it was like, it was a conversation and we were finding our feet with them. And each one we recorded 3 times. We usually took the second take. All the vocals are live. I didn't redo anything. We added harmonies after. That was the only overdub, basically, or harmonies and some percussion overdubs. And the clarinet was all live with the band in the moment. So you're hearing a conversation with some of the musicians and people that I love the most in the world.
Amazing.
We're just so incredibly generous.
You
You know,
can definitely feel that and hear that. Like it does have that live in the moment feeling. And just like that communal experience, I can hear that. Amazing. Thank you for sharing this experience with us. Great. Okay. I think that was everyone's questions. Thank you for sharing all your positive comments. I'm glad that this was helpful and informational. How can we find you in future if we want to stay in touch? Do you have social media?
yes, yes. I'm sorry. I was reading some of these wonderful comments and like gazing off into the screen.
Everyone's
It's so
so
funny.
sweet. So sweet. Everyone's so, wow.
So
So,
kind. Oh my goodness.
so much
I
love in
can't
here. This
tell
is a
you.
love fest in this chat.
It
I feel
means
like we need to copy paste this whole thing so we can have it later.
Oh, I'm just so grateful to you guys for, for listening and uplifting the work in this way because this is the that's the circle, right? If I make it and throw it out into the void, like I the reason to share it is to have this communion, this connection, and it means the world to me, and I do not take it for granted. And that is what I would say to any of you who are kind of earlier in the process of starting to share your work. It's vulnerable. It is. You just don't be afraid of the discomfort. Don't be afraid of the vulnerability. And the I guess what I would say is when you feel like something is scary, hard, that's often the thing we have to do, need to do to move through
Mm,
something, right? Or to grow. And that there's someone on the other side who desperately needs to hear
Mhm.
saying, you know? That's what I think. And
Mhm.
we have to assume that there's someone on the other side who needs to hear it. If it's something we
Mhm.
feel compelled to share. Yeah.
Mhm. I love this. I love this. Um, yeah, Tara says your music is heroic. Thank you for voicing silence. And I think that's what the songs do. It's like giving voice to like the voiceless past self, and it's like reclaiming your story, reclaiming your voice.
Because
Excellent
we get
webinar. Thank
to
you.
mother ourselves and take care of ourselves, even if we
Yes,
didn't have that, we get to choose that for ourselves later. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Best is yet to come. Thank you so much, Allison, for your time and all of your love and energy and all your art and all your words of wisdom. We really appreciate you, and we'll continue to listen to everything. And hopefully, we get to see you live at some point
Yes,
in Nashville.
2022. It's not all announced yet, but I'm definitely going to be spending some time in Canada in 2022 to be announced
Yay!
soon. Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep posted on your website for those shows coming up in 2022. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Folk Music Ontario and SOCAN, all the partners. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.